Michelle Guthrie says she's devastated to be sacked from her role as managing director of the ABC 2.5 years into her 5-year term. She also says she's considering legal options. The corporation's chairman made the announcement today, saying the board directors resolved it was not in the best interests of the ABC for Ms Guthrie to continue to lead the organisation.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Mediawatch. And that dramatic news came this morning after the ABC board sacked Managing Director Michelle Guthrie midway through her 5-year term. Huge shock though it was, there have been tensions all year between her and fellow executives, and a rift between her and the chairman, Justin Milne, who was soon on ABC News trying to explain why the board had dumped her.
I'm going to ask you this once again because it's the question that everyone's going to be asking. If she did a pretty good job on the digital stuff, where could she have succeeded more effectively?
The board felt in the end that her leadership style was not the style that we needed going forward. We needed a different leadership style, and that is the decision of the board.
And so how would you characterise her leadership style?
You're going to have to forgive me, but I'm not going to characterise her leadership style for you.
Quite what was wrong with her style, Milne would not say, but it's been seen by some as curt, abrasive and inconsistent. Guthrie was also reluctant to defend and articulate what the ABC stands for, and her vision of the future left some of her fellow executives concerned amid fears they might walk. Finally, her willingness or skills in lobbying for public funding have also been questioned.
How would you describe the relationship that Michelle Guthrie was able to develop with government?
That's possibly an area that could have been better. I think that's fair to say.
In small groups, Guthrie could be charming and persuasive, but if you shared a lift with her, she rarely engaged. Word is, she was often absent. And 2 weeks ago, she made some astonishing revelations, telling the Fin Review she was not comfortable with the public profile that came with the job. She knew no one in Canberra when she returned to Australia, and she'd only been looking for a job as a non-executive director, but no one would give her that gig. Which begs the question, why did the ABC employ her? And which also makes you ask, why did she take the job, given it requires a passion for public broadcasting and a determination to fight its many critics while ensuring government funding continues to flow. Today at the ABC, it appeared there were few regrets. Four Corners boss Sally Neighbour tweeted bravely,
"Excellent decision."
And John Fain, who famously tackled the MD in public for not defending the ABC, was cock-a-hoop.
She was refusing to conduct any interviews on air. She would not take on her role as a champion for this organisation publicly. She would not advocate for us in the public domain, in the public space, which was an astonishing fail on her part. Those who worked closely with her say she wasn't confident engaging publicly, which is an extraordinary thing for someone paid $1 million a year to run the most important cultural institution in the nation.
For her part, Michelle Guthrie says she is devastated by her sacking. And in a statement, she argued it was not justified.
At no point have any issues been raised with me about the transformation being undertaken, the investing in audiences strategy, and my effectiveness in delivering against that strategy.
Obviously, we don't yet know who will take Guthrie's place, but for the moment, the man who runs ABCTV will be in charge. David Anderson takes over at a difficult time, with deep funding cuts, 2 inquiries, talk of a financial black hole, and as always, an army of critics. We wish him the very best of luck. But now, to tennis and the world exclusive we'd all been waiting for, which naturally had a question about that famous tantrum at the US Open.
You then smashed your racket. Do you regret that at all?
It was at this point that Serena's publicist stepped in off camera.
Sorry, that's 4 questions about the US Open, so...
Are you comfortable or not?
Change topics.
I'm in your hands, Serena. I'm totally in your hands.
And that was the tense moment Lisa Wilkinson asked one too many questions of tennis superstar Serena Williams on the project last night. Wilkinson scored the interview almost 2 weeks ago, just days after Serena's tennis tanty divided the world and inspired that now infamous Mark Knight cartoon in the Herald Sun, which hit the headlines just about everywhere. But sadly, any questions on that were deemed to be right off limits.
I was told in no uncertain terms before I sat down in that room that if I asked about the Mark Knight cartoon, Serena would get up and walk. There would be no ifs or buts. She did not want to discuss it. And I know that would make great tabloid TV to have a walk-off from Serena Williams, but I was actually more interested in her answers to the US Open questions.
Well, sure, but why not just leave the question till last? Even if she did walk out, you'd still have the interview, right? Well, in this case, maybe not, because Serena came with strings attached. She only talked to 10 because she's a paid ambassador for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, a campaign run by Australian bra maker Burley. And Burley called the shots. These included limiting the questions and making 10 sit on the tape for more than a week to comply with an embargo. Burley also forced radio hosts Dave Hughes and Kate Langbroek to sit on their exclusive for even longer. As Hughesy revealed on Twitter,
not allowed to run interview for a couple of weeks. The company that Serena is promoting, and thus why she's doing interviews, which were organised before the controversy, call the shots.
And that, said co-host Kate Langbroek, was ridiculous, frustrating and counterproductive. Well, Kate, we agree. And it's increasingly a problem for interviews with celebrities who enforce their own PR agenda. If you don't play by their rules, you don't get to play the game again. And meanwhile, the public is shortchanged. But now to the other big ABC story of the week.
The ABC has uncovered the role played by Australia's two most powerful media barons in the lead-up to Malcolm Turnbull's removal as Prime Minister. It's emerged that Seven West media boss Kerry Stokes asked Rupert Murdoch why the latter's News Corporation was running so hard against Mr Turnbull. Mr Murdoch reportedly told Mr Stokes that, quote, Malcolm has got to go.
That was the lead story on ABC's 7pm news last Tuesday, following similar revelations that morning from columnist Joe Aston in the Australian Financial Review. The key claim in both stories, or the claim that's caused most fuss, relates to an alleged private conversation between the two powerful media moguls.
Mr Murdoch told Mr Stokes that Malcolm has got to go. The West Australian suggested that'd risk a Labor government and a more militant industrial relations landscape. Rupert Murdoch's reply, 3 years of Labor was a price he was willing to pay.
The implication is that Murdoch then ordered his papers to bring Turnbull down. So, is it plausible? You bet it is. For decades, Murdoch's been interfering in Australian, American and British politics and trying to get his preferred leader over the line. But just because Rupert has form, it does not mean he's guilty. And Murdoch's News Corp and Sky columnists were busy screaming, it's garbage.
This is mind-blowingly inane. This is the publicly funded national broadcaster leading its bulletin with a conspiracy theory that belongs in the Green Left Weekly. There's no evidence for this.
So, is that true? Well, it does all rest on that private conversation between Murdoch and Stokes. So, who is telling us what was said? Well, it's certainly not Murdoch, and Stokes says it's not him. So who could it be? Without actually naming his source, Probyn all but outed our former PM.
This version of events has been relayed by Mr Turnbull to multiple people since he left for New York. He's also told people he called Mr Murdoch himself to ask whether he was using his media empire to campaign against his prime ministership.
But whoever the source may be, can their account be trusted? Well, clearly it's second-hand at best, because Probyn admitted his crucial claim, Murdoch told Stokes Malcolm's got to go.
Exactly when and how this happened is unclear, whether it was in person or by phone.
So the informant was obviously not in the room. And that, according to the Australian's editorial, makes the story all but worthless.
If an explosive claim rests on a private conversation involving two people, Mr Stokes and Mr Murdoch, the story is no more than gossip unless at least one of the pair goes on the record or the reporter obtains a copy or transcript of the exchange.
Fair point, but the Age's editorial argued in contrast, it's surely in the public interest to air it. So, is there anything we can be sure of? Well, I think we can conclude that Stokes and Turnbull did talk during the week of the spill. It's not been denied by Stokes, and it was confirmed by David Crowe in the Fairfax papers. I'd also accept that Stokes and Murdoch had their private conversation, because Murdoch and Stokes have not denied it, and both have had the chance. But Stokes does dispute what was said, telling the ABC,
"The characterisation and supposed details of the private conversations you have assigned to me are wrong."
Note, however, he does not deny that Murdoch said Malcolm must go, and he could easily have done so. Stokes did deny that the moguls had ever exchanged text messages, as the Australian's front page trumpeted on Thursday.
"I have never received a text from Rupert Murdoch on this or any matter. I don't think he has my number, nor I his."
But that is just irrelevant. While ABC News stupidly ran a graphic implying that's how the two men conversed, Probyn did not in fact claim that. So, if we assume that Rupert did say Malcolm must go, which is what the Fin also reported, did he then order his editors to launch an attack? Former Murdoch editor Bruce Guthrie reckons that's certainly in character, but he told the ABC it's not quite how it works.
There's no edicts. I mean, you don't get a phone call from Rupert saying, look, you're now backing Tony Abbott, Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd, whatever it may be.
So what does happen? Reminding us that Murdoch had been in town, Guthrie says his annual visits follow a pattern.
A one-on-one with each of his editors, and then he has a number of functions, lunches, dinners, in which he takes the temperature of the room and then he makes pronouncements, such as, I think Tony Abbott's all right, or I think Malcolm's got to go. And then every editor that attends those then walks out and factors that in to their next editorial, their next page one coverage, if not consciously, at least subconsciously, maybe even subliminally, because they know deep down that if they don't reflect the proprietor's wishes, they probably won't be an editor for him for much longer.
So the $64,000 question, did the News Corp papers in fact swing against Turnbull after Rupert arrived? Well, Mediawatch looked at the coverage 4 weeks ago and said we saw no evidence of the Australian or the telly campaigning to bring Turnbull down. But once he was in play, the paper hardly rallied for him to stay. Line up the Australians' front pages of that last week, and they're certainly not supportive of Turnbull. Most of the paper's columnists also called for him to go, including this bunch with star billing on Monday's front page. Nor did any of the Australians' editorials say, stop, the Prime Minister must stay, which if they'd supported Turnbull, they surely would have done. So it was all pretty negative, as indeed the Australian had been for months on energy and climate, the policies that got Turnbull into trouble. But as one former Australian journalist, now Fairfax's chief political correspondent David Crowe, notes,
News Corp was not alone in reporting the failures of the government and the threat to its leader.
And he adds,
News Corp is not the clone army its critics make out. It has plenty of shrewd, fair journalists. Whatever Murdoch thought and said, the company's best commentators wrote as they saw fit.
However, as we said 4 weeks ago, News Corp and Sky columnists like Andrew Bolt, Paul Murray and Peter Credlin, along with 2GB's Alan Jones and Ray Hadley, were doing their damnedest to get rid of Turnbull from day one. And Murdoch certainly did have a role there, because it was his vision to make Sky News like Fox News and employ an army of right-wing commentators who laid into Turnbull and his policies night after night after night. But, let's face it, Malcolm also had a major role. Had he not lost 38 news polls in a row and pissed off his supporters and his enemies, he wouldn't have had to worry about what News Corp thought, because he would still be sitting comfortably in the lodge and the Libs would not be in such disarray. But finally, to some alarming news for property owners from Nine's most serious current affairs show, 60 Minutes.
It's no secret Australia is experiencing a downturn in the property market. But if you own your own home or have a mortgage, there's worse news. Many believe calling it a downturn is foolishly optimistic. The slump we're currently in is more like falling off a cliff.
Yes, according to Nine's trusted news brand, financial doomsday looms. And Tom Steinfort's two-part report last Sunday sounded the alarm.
Real estate and finance experts you're about to meet predict the value of your house could slide by as much as 40% in the next year. Yes, 2/5 of your home's worth wiped out in just 12 months.
Yep, you heard right. Your $1 million home could be worth only 600 grand this time next year. So, who are these real estate and finance experts predicting economic catastrophe?
This is looking right in the teeth of a gale, and that gale could lead us to a recession. At the worst end of the spectrum, if everything turned against us, we could see property prices 40 to 45% down from their peaks, which is a huge deal.
It certainly would be. Cue the scary music. But note North's important qualification.
If everything turned against us.
And what chance is there of that? Well, just 20%, North told Mediawatch, which was the key fact that went missing from the 60 Minutes script. And what about that 12-month timeline? Well, that was certainly not what North said.
At no time did I say this is going to happen in the next 12 months. I was quite specific that this is a 2 to 3 year scenario.
North, in fact, presented 3 economic scenarios to the 60 Minutes producers, but only one, the most extreme and the least likely, got a mention.
My concern is the message got diluted. When you start saying the only scenario is this, you've overreached.
North is a well-known property market bear, but he's not the only one warning that prices could fall. The Commonwealth Bank reckons they could drop by up to 10% from their peak in Sydney and Melbourne, where the market is hottest. And Louis Christopher told 60 Minutes he also expected a fall.
The market was clearly overvalued. There's no doubt about that.
But a 40% crash in prices? Highly unlikely, he wrote later in a column for Property Observer.
Our various government bodies have the capacity and the will to intervene if such a scenario were to become apparent. They can cut interest rates, they can introduce a first home owner grant, they can introduce quantitative easing, they can loosen recent regulatory requirements on the banking sector. There are precedents for all these actions.
So, what did he think of the programme?
I was disappointed and unhappy. The segment was sensationalist to say the least.
Veteran finance commentators like Michael Pascoe agreed, as did respected economists like Shane Oliver. So, how come Channel 9 could present a calamitous economic scenario without a moment of qualification or balance? They told us.
We stand by this story and some of the risks it highlighted, and would note both Martin North and Jamison Lautet have told Mediawatch that they believe we gave a fair and accurate representation of their positions with regard to the residential property market, household debt levels and mortgage crisis.
Well, that's true, but the vast majority of experts believe the severity of the crash they're predicting, on which the programme based its entire story, is bunkum. What a shame 60 Minutes couldn't find room for any of them. And there's more about tonight's stories on our Facebook page or our website, where you can read a transcript and download the programme. And don't forget Media Bites on your favourite social media platform every Thursday. But for now, until next week, that's it from us. Goodbye.